Now, I did say with all of this, Texas Tech, all the credit in the world. Great plan. James Blanchard, a GM, executing well. Joey McGuire, recruiting well. Portal class, top 5 in the country. Can't complain with that. Pretty good team last year. Best 3-year stretch of Texas Tech football under Joey McGuire that they've had since the Mike Leach era. Love all of that. But I also just said, hey, I've got to be careful in what kind of absolutes I actually speak in about the Big 12 and its future relative to the SEC and the Big 10 and the ACC too, for that matter. The gap between Power 2 and non-Power 2. That's why I bring up this quote that came from the article, man. Came from the article. So James Blanchard, I would say, took a bit of a shot at the Big 12. And we got to be careful with this friendly fire, everybody. We got to be careful with this friendly fire. So Blanchard is explaining, he's talking about Ole Miss. And he says, Ole Miss did a heck of a job getting their D-line last year. I think they probably had the best D-line in college football. The issue is they're still playing in the SEC. That D-line they assembled isn't anything different than what the conference sees on a week-to-week basis. He references the Rebels not to throw any shade, but rather to point out the difference in what he's attempting in Lubbock. Quote, I'm excited to see how a portal class at this level works out in the Big 12, Blanchard said. This is tricky, man, because, yes, I think we all understand what he's saying. Objectively, the SEC is a more talented football conference. Nobody is ever going to argue that. You know, I got called the most, the most biased show earlier in the chat, whatever it might be. I mean, as heavily as this channel may skew toward the Big 12 and trying to defend the Big 12, nobody here is ever going to try and convince you the Big 12 is legitimately a more talented conference. We don't even need recruiting numbers to bear that out. You just go look at the NFL and how many guys are drafted from each school. The SEC always is going to have more talent. So I understand he's saying, look, that Ole Miss defensive line is just another defensive line in the SEC in terms of talent. Got to figure out a way to make it work and execute it, because you can't just rely on that. And fair enough. But that plays into the narratives that the SEC fans try to throw out there. Like, this is like raw meat to the crowd that is just going to throw out there, well, it's just different in the SEC. Like what Shane Beamer said the other day, it's just different in the SEC. Because yes, Ole Miss may have had an incredibly talented defensive line, and you would say, well, that's just another day in the SEC. Well, I mean, they lost to Kentucky. Like, is it just another day when you're playing Kentucky? That was a 4-win team. Like, I don't know that it's fair to say that when Ole Miss is out there losing to Kentucky. Like, they didn't miss the playoff because the SEC is such a brutal week in, week out thing. It's because they just weren't a good enough total team. And the teams, while there may have been more raw talent in the SEC last year, the teams did not equate to being head and shoulders above everybody. So I did bristle. I must admit, I bristled at that quote from James Blanchard, because we get enough of that, man. We get enough of that already from everybody else, whether it's Paul Feinbaum or Lane Kiffin or, like I said, Shane Beamer the other day. We get plenty of that from all over the place. We don't need the friendly fire, okay? We don't need the friendly fire, my man. And that's in a big ESPN article that I would think is getting a lot of run, because it was a really fascinating article. We'll see. I don't know. Maybe a bunch of people didn't read it. Hopefully it just stays here. Hopefully that can be our little secret. I guess, I'll whisper that a little bit. I'll whisper that. And I'm cool with Texas Tech, like, having a little bit of confidence or cockiness to them about this. Like, Blanchard, I feel like, represents the fan base in that regard. Like, Texas Tech fans love you. You guys are as passionate and edgy and cocky and confident as about anybody in the Big 12. It doesn't always work out super well on the football front. But look, you just recruited with the biggest of big boys, man. Your class is one spot above Oregon who was the number 1 seed in the college football playoff. Your transfer class is 1 spot above Oregon. You should have some edge to you after that. But just we don't need to take it out on the Big 12. Don't need to take it out on the Big 12. The point he is making is, look, Ole Miss can bring in a class like that last year, and it may not make as much of a difference because everybody is that talented in the SEC. We're bringing in a class that talented, and we're taking it now to the Big 12. So the insinuation there, reading between the lines, you'd be thinking, oh, he is saying that the Big 12 is just not nearly as good. We know that this year, based on results on the field, Big 12 pretty close. Big 12 pretty close. Maybe not over the last 20 years, but this year there was not that much of a difference. I would also say a word of caution there along those same lines. Like, this is also why, I mean, Texas Tech, despite this portal class, has not been like a slam dunk favorite to win the conference. I read you, I don't remember how long ago it was that I did the Big 12 class, not class rankings, but the preseason top 25, like the way too early top 25s that were out there. And Tech was in a couple, but it was not like a consensus, and certainly was not the overwhelming consensus as number one, because it doesn't always work out like that. We just talked about Ole Miss famously. They finished on the outside looking in. I've already used Jerome Tang as a reference on the show tonight. Jerome Tang spent, guys, I can tell you, he spent not that far off of what Tech spent on its portal class on a basketball portal class this year. And at one point they were 7-11. Got a lot better, and they're playing a lot better now. But at one point they were 7-11. So the money and bringing in the raw talent does not always work out the way that you want it to. Colorado, if we're talking about like top tier talent, Colorado had the best crop of that of anybody in the conference last year and had a good season, but didn't make the Big 12 championship. I mean, they had two guys that are probably going to be top 10 draft picks on that roster. So people still, I think, also have a little bit of trepidation, like believe it when I see it with Texas Tech. I've always said that. I mean, they're 52-82 in the Big 12 since Mike Leach left, but moving in the right direction and now pushing all their chips to the middle of the table. I'm eager to see how it goes. They're also look, there are other reasons people may not be quite as high on them right now. You're breaking in new coordinators, which again, heavy investment into the program. They invested to go get two of the best absolute possible hires that you could have made for your coordinators. You know, just ask Houston about that. Sorry, Cougars. So there's all of that goes into it too. But if you are James Blanchard, if you are a Tech fan, like, you got to have a little bit of bravado. Maybe that's the word I should have been using with this. You do have to have a little bit of bravado to you. I just would prefer that it didn't come at the expense of the Big 12 like that. But this is going to be, make no mistake about it, a very good thing for the league that Texas Tech is getting this level of attention. And if they can up the talent level in the league and go accomplish something with this year and show that, like, hey, if you find the right guy to throw the resources behind something, you can make it work big like this. Don't think that's a bad thing for the league at all either. And Texas Tech definitely has as much like financial potential as basically anybody in the league, minus maybe BYU. BYU has obviously a different situation and why they have so much financial backing. But those two are probably at the top of the list. Off the top of my head, at least, I would say those two have to be pretty much the top of the list in the conference. So I digress. Anyway, I thought that to be a really, really fascinating story to kick the show off with tonight. Starter 179, appreciate you. If you guys want to chime in on the show tonight, you can click the $ below the chat box to submit a super chat. Starter 179, Ole Miss got stomped by TCU, Texas Tech, and Baylor in a row. Don't love that, Blanchard. It's not even accurate. Hey, Starter 179, I appreciate that comment because Starter 179 is a Tech guy, Texas Tech fan. So, yeah, I'm with you. It's a great point about like Ole Miss specifically being the example. Like they have had some struggles. They have had some struggles with actual Big 12 teams. So that's a part of it. Fair enough. Appreciate you, Starter 179. Good to hear from you. Good to see you, my friend.